Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to the second half, and this will probably be split into perhaps a few lectures, because soon enough here, chapter 12 is quite a doozy, and there's a lot to say about that chapter and to reference and such. So I'm sure the lectures that cover the last half of this book will probably be drawn out a little bit more. Okay, so starting with chapter 11, our only time that we really get Garland in this entire story, right? So, but I do think this is an important part of the novel. I think it's, huge in terms of a kind of plot structure that drives a certain theme forward, and we'll discuss that a little bit. But in this brief time we have with Garland, one thing he does say is, and Andy couldn't be a bounty hunter unless he thought he was actually human. So basically making the comment that it's only a human being's job to be a bounty hunter, that only a human being can kind of fulfill that role. Says something about how he feels about humans, perhaps. And it does kind of start to delve into the bounty hunter, the android perspective a little bit more there, from their perspective. He claims that Resch stayed for a synthetic memory system, which could be an aggressive human behavioral pattern, right? He's really trying to push the idea that Resch could be an android, right? Perhaps to throw Rick off. Maybe you can read into this more thematically as well, right? Based on what's been said about androids up to this point. He criticizes the idea that androids are treated lower than animals. And the same could be historically said of slaves and human beings who are treated in those such ways throughout time as well. He claims Rick, notice there's a lot of kind of claims against Rick here, right? He's got a lot to say, and it's almost like he's passing a judgment here. He claims that Rick is in just as much trouble as Garland is, right? Just as much trouble. And he says that Officer Krams took a chance. And I think Krams is a symbol of this kind of dried up, died out humanity, at least in my personal opinion. So humanity took a chance and failed, right? Took a chance by bringing you in. Here's a question. Do you agree with this sentiment in regards to our own humanity? It is kind of written to be relatable. Garland goes on to say that Polakov was a good one, which is a reference to the Benelli reflex test. And he says that humans have empathy at the same time that Phil Resch walks in the door with the empathy test, which is very ironic. Garland goes on to try to kill Resch with his right hand, and I think the right hand could be important in terms of it's the favorable hand of God, right? If you're looking at it with those motifs in mind, it's the hand of judgment, it's the favorable hand of God. There is a descent as both Phil and Rick fall from their chairs, so we're always looking at the motif, the heavily used motif, I feel, of ascent versus descent. And here we have a descent as they kill yet another android. Think about that as we get further on in the text too. The directions you might be noticing that are being referenced as major acts are taking place, right? And they shoot Garland, of course, all right? Resch says, quote, "The android flees where the bounty hunter pursues," unquote. And this seems to embody what he stands for as a human being, right? That he will constantly pursue. I think it's the wasp. I think that is what's kind of nicer about bees than wasps? I think wasps tend to be more aggressive. And we've already have that reference. We have that nice reference when we think about the Voight-Kampff empathy test, and one of the key questions there, you have a wasp, always to a woman too it seems, you have a wasp on your arm, right? Always somebody kind of pursuing you, right? The Vespa in German. Now, the reason why this whole part of the book is, I think, where we start to see the tipping point in Rick is because Garland creates a situation where now Rick has met another bounty hunter, right? So a way to assess himself, to watch how Phil Resch does it, and then he can start to contemplate his own character, his own feelings. And this is where, very early on, it seems, after they meet, we start to see, Rick starts to notice noticeable changes, right? Rick says he doesn't have to think of Andes as it any longer, which is a highly dehumanizing way of thinking about another human being, or even animal life, some people would argue, right? But to see another human being as it, right? And these things have happened throughout history, right? So we realize really just in fact how horrible it's been. Right, it is the dehumanizing of the androids. It has happened historically to Jewish people, other groups of people, really throughout time. Phil has a shark-like lean face. It is the hunter. It is the predator, right? We're given the animals. I love how this book literally deals with animals in terms of the Sydney's catalog and how rare and expensive and how needed they are, right? How prized they are in our society. But notice the animal characteristics that are brought in through description to just to our characters as well, right? Shark-like. Makes it kind of clear where Phil stands. There's a mention of a kind of false memory system, which maybe could be a redemptive state, right, for the android or for a person, I guess. And plot-wise, Rick needs Phil's help to get Luba Luft, right? And the question is why? And I think some quick answers would be Phil's callousness will bolster Rick's ability to do his job and follow through and get this woman. Rick will learn, reflect, and perhaps change on account of his run-ins with Phil, right? Because he's changing and he's starting to have different feelings toward these androids, just to put it plainly, now he's going to need someone like Phil who is completely callous to feelings about androids, sees them as it, right, has dehumanized to that extent. So he needs this kind of person with him in order to retire Luba Luft, right? Otherwise, his changing perspective might get in the way. So what we have here really, and I never noticed this until spending the time to get these lectures together, I like to call it a tale of two police headquarters, or a tale of two police stations, whatever you prefer. The one with Harry Bryant, right, which takes us to the beginning of the text and setting us off on this Andy hunt to begin with. You hunt androids to protect humans. The other, you apprehend humans, the one here on Mission Street, and we've already discussed that. The other, you apprehend humans to help protect androids, right? So now it's almost like a protection system that's in place to get these android killers off the streets, right? These human bounty hunters, right? So it's a really nice stark contrast, right? Because I never, up until this point of getting this stuff ready, I never knew what to make of the strange police station that shows up in the middle of nowhere. But now that I see it as the beginning of his redemption, the white table that he starts off at, and he meets Phil, which is a horrible reflection of what he could be. And we're not even done yet, right? We're just getting started. You see the importance of this, right? And you see that contrast. This is redemption, which could start with acknowledging your wrongdoing in the first place. I'll mention this quickly. Philip K. Dick is known for giving us main characters that are kind of part of the problem in the first place. So they work for the corrupt government or company, right? They are the special agent that's already done a lot of, twisted and kind of, questionable things. So he gives us people who are on the inside who then, through kind of revelation, realization, redemption, whatever you want to call it, tend to have to come out of all of that, right? Which is not a brand new theme by any means, but those are some of the interesting ways he creates his characters. Well, a little bit of talk about Phil's squirrel Buffy. Buffy is, believe it or not, short for Elizabeth, and that name translates to an oath to God, right? So maybe this is Phil, as the kind of bounty hunter he is, discussing his connection to God through this squirrel. It's constantly, quote, running in a wheel, but staying in the same spot, right? Unquote. And this can either be applied to Rick or Phil. I think this is the plight of the bounty hunter. It's Rick's and Phil's never-ending cycle of destroying androids in order to procure an animal, hopefully real, to then connect them to some empathic kind of pattern, right, of society, and they feel good about it. They feel literally elevated by it. You see it through ascending to the rooftops and spending this time there, right? It's kind of an elevation for them. And I guess that is that what could that be an oath to God? Could that be what an oath to God kind of feels like, which is just being part of a never-ending cycle that's going in a certain direction, right? But a cycle that's kind of involved. Rick says, in this brief discussion about Buffy, Rick says, squirrels aren't too bright. And we get the word bright here, which is synonymous with light. And usually that's kind of, God's favor, right? And then they just fly on, right? We get that, quote unquote, they flew on. And what we have here are two wasps flying through the sky, right? And I think the best understanding of wasp, I'll elaborate later on, but the best understanding of a wasp is it could be a bounty hunter and it could be an android, but somebody who has murdered, somebody who has pursued, somebody who has aggressively violated another person, but still has this kind of possibility of flight in terms of salvation, right? Maybe there's still an ascent that's possible, but they sting. It speaks to the type of character that they are, right? Which brings us to chapter 12. And which brings us to a painter. For those of you, I know we have some artists in the class, every class you ever teach. You have some really talented artists. Somebody you want to be looking at is a painter named Edvard Munch. And it's E-D-V-A-R-D, all right, Edvard, and Munch, M-U-N-C-H. And I'll even try to the best of my ability, because I have it queued up here, show you the couple paintings that are nicely referenced in this book. And I just remember when I really started teaching this book, and then we started showing the students the artwork, it was a very engaging thing. And you just, credit to the author, in my opinion, Philip K. Dick, for just giving us more to look at, right? Kind of including these allusions that then we can start to look at for their own merit, and on top of that, how it kind of plugs in meaning for us in the story. So to begin, here's what this author this painter thematically deals with in his work. Human mortality, which just means I'm going to die someday. All right, it's going to happen. That takes us to I think we've learned about it, the U curve of happiness, right? A lot easier to accept death when you're in your 70s, 80s, than it is when you're in your 40s and ages like that. All right. Okay, so yeah, human mortality, pretty heavy stuff. Here's the next one, chronic illness. Something, that could be life debilitating. Chronic illness just means something you have that's never going to go away, right? It's chronic, it's with you. I have chronic asthma, it's controlled, but I do have it, right? It's part of my genetics here. I'm sure you know people who might have other chronic illnesses as well. Another theme here, and this one I think has a lot to do with our characters, such as Luba Luft and Rachel especially, and even maybe Pris and Irmgard to some degree, is sexual liberation. A kind of freedom from sexual repression, or a kind of conditioning, right, and breaking free from that, right? Which might mean something quite different in the time that he's painting than it does for us in the year 2021, so I would just mention that. But all the same, there's your topic. And here is the beautiful last one, which I love, and I think Phil K. Dick must have been right on target with this one, religious aspirations. To be accepted within a world of religion, to be considered, that you can be a part of that process, a part of that journey, a part of that feeling. How, you know, you can explain it in so many different ways, I'm sure. But that topic of aspiring to be religious, right? And I think that's such a huge topic for this story. And a huge topic in terms of just historically people and humanity and throughout time and how people have treated each other, right? Some people have been included in that huge idea and some people simply have not. And we know the androids have not, right? That's kind of the idea. So these topics of Edvard Munch really help to outline what's ahead here in this chapter. Here we go. Phil says she's flown, meaning maybe she's ascended, Luba Luft, and she's left the War Memorial Opera House. And this could maybe be her potential salvation, right? I'm always thinking in terms of ascent as kind of some kind of freedom, liberation, right? Could be a redemption. Don't forget, all of these androids have killed human beings back on Mars or on the ship where they mutinied to break free from it all. So they have that, and I think that's why they're Nexus 6s. I think that's ultimately what it comes down to, is they carry the sin of, you know, that heavy sin of murder, right? Just like Rick does, just on his end. Now the teacher's voice, I think, is the intro as this chapter begins. We're in this museum, we're looking at this Edvard Munch exhibit, and the teacher's voice, there's a teacher there with students, and it might be a woman, but even so, what does the teacher's voice do? It penetrates throughout all of the rooms, and I want to focus on that diction, penetrates, especially from a sexual standpoint, right? Because there's a lot of that in this chapter, so this is just the beginning. That voice of a teacher who tells you how things are penetrates all of the rooms of the war exhibit, right? And when you think about what travels through that world of war, men and aggression, and maybe something linked to who we think we are, who men think they are throughout time. But it's something linked to their anatomy, their state of mind, the psychology, right? And it penetrates throughout this entire war memorial, right? Moving forward, men have infiltrated the world of war and have, in a sense, become intrusive instruments. Intrusive instructors on the matter. This makes sense considering the warlike, homicidal nature of a bounty hunter and what they plan to do to this woman. Let's not forget the symbolism of her name. And what are they going to do? They're going to kill her, right? That's their plan, to retire her. Maybe give her the test, but if not, remember, it's not needed. Let's not forget the symbolism of her name, which seems sacred and redeemable. Luba being love, Luft being air, which essentially speaks to freedom and ascent, right? All right, moving forward. Animals do kind of require that warmth. We've talked about that idea before. Phil and Rick have brought it up. And it does correlate with this idea that Earth is this cold shell, right? This cold, empty shell. All right, so here I'd like to provide, I'll do the best of my ability, and you can always pause it, right? What's nice about these lectures is you can pause on the image, look at it for a moment, and then I can, then you can catch right back up with my lecture here. But let me show you the first picture. I've seen it before, and you can pull it up on your own computer, on your own screen. You can take a look. All right. And I'll just kind of share the analysis here. Phil asks, I wonder if that's what an android feels like, right? That's what Phil asks. And this is when we stop to say, well, yeah, how could an android feel like that, right? This figure in this kind of haze, right? This painting that doesn't quite look human and yet looks like it's in a horrible state of anxiety or fear or dismay or, however you look at it, right? So how can an android feel like that? Well, the way I always have explained this with my students in classrooms and such is, how hard is life, right? Makes you want to scream at times, right? The deep psychological, emotional problems that we carry on a daily basis. that for some of us can be crippling. For some of us, we kind of, you know, barrel through, right? But it's a heaviness. But imagine being a part of a society where, you know, we all want to scream in our own kind of way, for our own reasons. We want to let out some scream. Especially these androids, think about that. They're hunted, they're pursued, they're not seen as real. Nobody considers them human. They've been dehumanized to major kind of extent, right? To a major extent. But they also, what's even worse is they want to scream, but notice what's happening in the painting. Screaming, but covering your own ears to your scream, which essentially means that maybe as individuals, just to give you some of the analysis, you know, just right off the bat, that we close our own minds or our own ears to our own screams, right? And we just kind of carry this with us, which maybe leads to, well, look at the painting, a sense of isolation, maybe not able to get over certain issues in our life, whatever it could be, right? But we scream, we are screaming. Look what we're going through. I'm talking about us in general as individuals in our society, but now let's start to consider people in the Holocaust. Now let's start to consider people in Cambodia, right, and other places where we've seen genocide, the Philippines throughout time. Imagine being those people, right, and the screams, but you are a part of a society that doesn't understand your empathy, doesn't have empathy for you, I should say, right, and there it is. They don't see you as human. They don't give you the same concern they're willing to give their own population, their own people. Sometimes that people capsulated in some belief in God as well, right? And I think that idea is explored in the story too, is how that can be used to create a people that has such a callousness toward other groups of people, sharing empathy, sharing religious aspirations with others, right? But imagine the screams coming from those people, and just people suffering from all kinds of issues. And yet here we are covering our own ears. We don't want to hear it ourselves. You know, I think a good example for this, at least for people in school, is it's not easy. Like, at the end of the day, when you're a senior, all they see is grades, 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 grades. But nobody's really asking you how you feel about getting all those grades, how hard it was. All the struggle and the heartache and the endless nights and whatever. Nobody even asks about that. It's just this kind of objectified, it's this objectified sense of who you are. All right? And maybe we do it to ourselves too, as we have the figure closing his own ears here, right, to his own screams. Another thing I should mention here, because it comes back to mind, Heidegger. And Heidegger has a famous quote that says, "Science wishes to know nothing about the nothing," right? And science, what he means by that is, when it comes to science, and notice we live in a STEM world, right? Everybody wants STEM. Everybody thinks math is the way to success and engineering and these practical careers that are out there, right? We live in that type of an environment, accounting, you name it, right? And the reason is because our world is easy to measure in terms of accumulation. How much, how much, how much. Through science, we clearly can measure progress because, look, products are being made, inventions. We're seeing numbers grow on charts, right? There's clear accumulation taking place. Science wishes to know nothing about the nothing. Throw in the economy. Everything linked to the economy has a lot to do with science, right? Logical, technical ways that things work, the ins and outs of them. So let's get back to that initial statement. Science, all that, doesn't want to know nothing about the nothing. Now notice that we have the article in front of nothing at the end. There's something special about the nothing at the end. And just to fast forward through it, science wishes to know nothing about the nothing. What is that nothing? It is, ironically, paradoxically, everything. It is your psychology. I go back to the example I started with. Schools only care about your grades. They don't care about your psychology, how you feel about yourself after getting those grades or not getting those grades, and how you feel about yourself. It's this objective measure of who we are, right? The psychology has been left out of it. And don't forget, when it comes to religion, it is largely psychological, right, in many respects, especially the symbolism and stuff, and some of the stuff involved. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people. You know, it's largely psychological. It's about you as an individual and your sense of yourself in your world, in your society, right? That's what it kind of caters to. All right, so I just wanted to mention that, because all of that is, you know, ideas that we can talk about when we look at The Scream by Munch, right? All right, so moving on from that, it's mentioned that it could be a man or woman, right, through the narration, the figure in the scream. And the way the narration puts it is, the figure had become contained by its own howl. Its own howl that it's letting out is kind of containing it and freezing it in place as well. I guess you could say we are paralyzed by our own commotion, right? We're paralyzed by our own fear and pain and the way we express it. Covers its ears to its own sound. I had mentioned that. As people, we learn to cover up our own sense of fear, dread, confusion, and we keep it to ourselves. We unfortunately know that our screams don't matter, will not ripple, and arouse any concern. Welcome to being a dispelled race in a society that oppresses you, right? That's probably what it feels like, right? To scream, but know that it doesn't matter. This is obviously the androids, the Andes, in context of our book. I think the straightforward example, and I think the book caters to this, is the Jewish example, right? So Jews and others in context of Western history. Those who scream, but even silence their own minds to their own screams, right? We talk about the mental repercussions of this. And the creature screamed in isolation, right? Needed help, but there was no one there to give it. And this may prepare us for the motif of the sheep and the goat. Now, I want to speak quickly to the motif of the woodcuts. They're always asking or mentioning, oh, he did a woodcut of this. I think whenever we see woodcut, it's going to bring us back to the cat, right? Because there's the woodwright and carpentry, right? And some of that stuff. So I think it brings us back to just the idea of carpentry, right? Which might link us to the figure of Christ a little bit. All right, keeping track. Phil says he doesn't feel like the figure in the scream, so therefore he might be human, right? Remember the question was, is that what an Andy feels like? Rick shares his thoughts, right? They both talk about it. And then he says, oh, okay, if that's the case, I don't feel like that, so I know I'm a human being, right? And that might be, we're going to find out, right? I'm not going to lay out any spoilers here, but it's an interesting question about Phil. Is he human? Is he android? Both seem to have skewed views of each, so does it even matter at this point, right? Maybe it is just about, are you a good person? Maybe that's what it's going to come down to. All right, so when they finally find Luft, she is holding a printed category of Munch's paintings. And I think the way to understand this on a symbolic level is she's holding human experience in her arms, right? Almost like a student, right? Go back to that idea of the teacher a moment ago. Almost like a student in need of some kind of learning, and it's going to be provided by some kind of reflection analysis on these paintings. And, you know, I should mention this too. I mean, think about looking at a painting. I would imagine to interpret a painting for meaning, whatever that meaning might be, it takes empathy, because you're trying to understand what the author was creating on some emotional level, right? So it's a very empathic experience, I think, to reflect upon art, and especially then to create art as well. And we know that she is, in fact, an artist. Of course, she's an opera singer, right? She uses her voice, and very well. Just to get that fact out of the way, she's known to be quite brilliant, right? It's almost amazing she's in this position, being an escaped android, but she's put herself in the most starring kind of, you know, position in the city. And this is a, you know, crazy kind of metropolitan city in the future. So that's pretty amazing, and I think that speaks to the will of the androids to want to be a part of society, to want to fulfill some of these meaningful roles that usually would be reserved just for humans. So we understand the empathy here. She can do this. She wants to be a part of it. And to have somebody with the name Luba Luft once again at the War Memorial, that's what's needed to lift this world out of a state of war and chaos and hatred, is love, right? Exactly what her name translates to. Okay. Now, the other picture that she's interested in, oh, and I just want to say this too. Notice we have Munch's themes. We covered those earlier, about several minutes ago. And notice those are all highly applicable in the war memorial setting, right? So with war and the devastation and the despair that comes from that, these themes are relevant, right? What he puts in his art. Okay, so the next picture I'd like to show you here, I'll hold it up for just a moment. This is the one that Luba says she's very interested in. You can always look it up quickly. It is called Puberty. All right. And I think when you start to think about sexual liberation and being, having to break free from some kind of sexual repression, I think that's where those are probably the themes that come to mind when you start to look at this painting. All right. And you can pause the video, look at the painting, reflect upon it, see what you think, and then you can come right back. I will just kind of carry on here. Now, why would she be interested in this picture uniquely? Well, I think it's because we have to remember that she is beyond her build, the way she's built, her kind of body, is of an older woman. It is beyond puberty, right? So I think she's probably interested in this particular painting, Puberty, because she's never experienced it. She wasn't built this way. She wasn't built with it. And that, of course, is maybe one of the most, if not that most, I'm not a woman, I can't say it, but maybe one of the most important stages in a young woman's life is going through that. Just like a man, just like a young man as well, right? But remember with a woman, some of the crucial things that occur that are relevant thematically to this book. Procreation, giving birth, right? Now things like the planet regenerating itself, right? And refreshing itself. So now we're talking about capabilities that are imperative to the human condition, to the human survival, right? So it's relevant on that level too, not just the psychological, but all of it's so linked, right? Everything is so linked. One of the interesting things, I guess, about being a human being. Moving forward here, but now we understand why she's interested in this, right? Other ideas, intimacy. Maybe that's a stage where intimacy starts to develop or increase in a young woman's life. It's a rite of passage. Every woman goes through it, right? But she hasn't. The way she was built and the fact that she's an android, she was never, she comes after this, right? She was never, this is to be, will be compared to, say, somebody like Rachel Rosen, I think Pris, who appear to have younger forms, right? Younger bodies. The earth and this idea of bearing kind of life, right? All right, so here's where we start to see some of that interesting diction that I think shows the assertiveness and then the outright aggression of the men with Luba. Luba, obviously, the woman caught between these two men in this scene. Rick does offer. Remember, his ideas are changing. He already said, "I don't just see him as it. I don't feel the same way as you feel." He offers, and I think this is highly symbolic, to buy her that picture, which is to maybe say, "I think you're capable of that," or you can at least learn what that means or what that could, what that is through this art, right? Through something like this. And notice that these paintings, we were talking about like society doesn't care about the psychological. Notice that when we look at these paintings, the Scream and this one as well, it is highly psychological, right? It's kind of the analysis that we end up having. Some kind of sense of emotions or mental states, right? And these important times of our life. All right, moving forward here. Then what happens is he takes possession of her. And I think possession is a word that easily exerts that idea of male dominance. Don't forget, when you get married, traditionally, when you get married, man and woman, and even mixed partners, if this is the way they see it, You're taking possession of the bride. It is the father who is giving that as a form of property. I'm not saying that's the way it is, but that's traditionally the way it was, right? So it is property. It is possession. It is ownership. And now we will see a rather kind of scary tendency here by both men to exert a strong, a violent pressure on these women, on this one woman here, Luba. Moving forward, right? Rick notices the bulge, quote unquote bulge, of Phil's laser tube, easily kind of doubling up as a reference to the male genitalia, or the power of it, the aggressive nature of it, right? Maybe even more so when you consider like animals, right? Animals that are out there and such, right? Not human beings per se, but where we come from, which I think is explored later on with certain name symbolisms as well, right? Why are we sixes? Because we came from the swamp, before civilization, before some kind of conduct, right? Which you could say religion provides, right? Religion is civilization in that sense. There's others as well, but to take us away from savagery, to take us away from the beast. That we are. There's more specific references, biblical references to the beast as well, but I think it does work just in terms of evolution and the fact that we can be vicious animals. That is a part of one way of defining humanity. So the bulge of Phil's laser tube, right? We think about the cod pieces, right, that were mentioned in the very beginning of the text to accentuate the male genitalia, make it look bigger than it actually is. And that was a part of Romeo and Juliet days, right, as I said earlier on. Right, so Rick was just about to buy the book. Phil says it's not for sale, and he restricts that whole symbolic, that whole symbol of human experience, that you can find some interest in this, that you can relate to this. He cuts that off, right? A lot of stuff when it comes to cutting off, right? A lot of cutting off, restricting them from these being included in this way. Luba is instantly depressed by this. Who wouldn't be, right? You're not letting me learn about human experience. Trust me, AI right now is learning all about human experience when you think about all the things that it's kind of working on a daily basis, right? Finding its ways, but maybe not on that psychological level, of course. Luba is, they prod her. There's more like poking, right? Male genitalia. They prod her to the car. More male phallic kind of assertion here. They stop to see prints of artwork. Note the overriding ideas of copies of humans and copies of art. So we can have copies of humans, which are androids, and copies of art, which is just kind of being able to learn from artistic artwork, right? And learn about the human experience kind of through copies. And then all of a sudden a life returns to Luba. She asks again for puberty, something important that she wants to reflect upon. I'll just say that. It is $25. If you take the time to look this up biblically, not to say that you need to and this is accurate, but it does end up being a number that associates with grace upon grace, so just a lot of grace. And that's what Rick is trying to give her here, I think. And he knew he would. That's why he had to link up with Phil, so he knew he could get the job done, right? Because he's trying to help her. Rick agrees to buy it. At this point, I'll just ask the question, but I'll move on. What does this say about his character? Is he changing, and why? Right? And I think you'd have at least a few things to say there. Moving forward, Luba effectively categorizes Resch as a timeless predator, recounting a warlike characteristic, predatory, that literally goes back millions of years. And I think that's why we're in the War Memorial, to make sure we understand that this war and this killing and this dehumanization has been taking place since the beginning of time, and it still continues this day. Of course, it looks different, and different kind of scopes, I guess you could say, right? Different ways of occurring. But it's been here since the beginning of time, right? So it's a commentary, I think, on the full thread of violence in human civilization. Religion, as it can be said, corrects a primitive, and that goes for all religions, right, throughout the world. Religions tend to correct a primitive state. That's the idea. You're a savage, you're an animal. Here's religion, it creates empathy, you're connected. You're not these people who have to exist on your own any longer, right? That's the idea. Phil is maddened by moral truth that Luft causes him to consider. He gropes for his gun. You see that diction again, gropes. When do we often hear the word groping? Male sexual assault, right? So you can see all of that is being plugged in. I never really noticed how much until going through it this time around, right? But it's really through diction all over the place. He gropes for his gun, reminds us of sexual assault. Rick speaks to Phil's hastiness in killing Luba just because she is needling you. Needles, I think, brings us to nails. So I think it's bringing us to ideas that are focused on Christ and the crucifixion, and perhaps ideas that are adjacent to that. My personal opinion. Needling you. Well, what does needling mean? It means she's making you think about who you are, morally, ethically, and it's bugging you. And Phil is getting angry, right? Phil's getting angry. He's making him feel the pain of a certain humanity, her humanity. She's making him try to get in touch with a moral conscience. Phil, they talk about a hunted fear here, right? Hunted fear. What does Phil do as soon as he's challenged on this idea of morals and ethics? He shoots her. And where does he shoot her? In the stomach, which is the place where the baby would be, right? So make sure you write that down. It is right in the womb. Highly symbolic. As an android, you will never even have the sense of this, right? The ability. And that's the one place he shoots her. Is it random? Maybe. Is it just the place the laser beam ended up hitting? Maybe. But it is where the womb is, right? Is he afraid of this idea of androids? Notice that the second Blade Runner took that idea and ran with it, which is not cool in my mind, but androids can have babies now in the second Blade Runner. Remember, the book is highly different than even the first Blade Runner. There's major changes. Once you read the book and you really understand it, you can't really look at the movie other than it looks cool and the acting's pretty good. And Harrison Ford's the bomb, right, back in the day. The book is way better, though. Moving on with the book, here we go. So he shoots her right in the abdomen. She screams, and now she is the figure from the scream, the painting, right? Looks like the painting. Analysis confirmed. And Rick euthanizes her, puts her out of her misery. Now, you might say, no, he just wanted to get the bounty because he is going to collect on the bounty. He's going to take the money on Luba and tell Phil, I'm the one who did it, and you got other things to worry about, so I'm taking the bounty on this. However, I think what really happens here is she's screaming. She's in pain. You can talk about that painting again. And so he wants to put her out of her misery, and we get that idea of euthanasia here, right? All right. Rick also burns the book of prints he just bought her, so that kind of compassion, that outreach that he kind of lent symbolically through that act is now kind of, I guess you could say, deleted, pointless now, right? And he gets rid of it. In a way, it all feels kind of anticlimactic, right? Because Rick was headed somewhere, and then all of a sudden, this woman is gone, right? This android is gone. In a way, okay, very good. Phil is wholly confused by why Rick would destroy the prints because it's worth money. There's always that idea that things are worth money, and therefore they're important, right? They have value, whether it's animals or otherwise. It's a consumer society, right? It is a capitalist society. All right, so right after this, Rick asks, some of the most profound questions, really, to hit us so far. He asks if androids have souls, if they think that their lives could be better than they are, if they have aspirations. We go back to religious aspirations, perhaps, but other things too, like what they want to do with their lives, work, who knows, right? He's changing. The more time he spends with Phil, the more he recognizes his errors, right? He realizes who he was. He's been Phil the whole time. Can he change? Phil even cocks his head, direct reference to the penis, right? He is as rigid. He is this is my own way of putting it. He's a very static character, right? He represents that one particular idea of masculinity and aggression, all being symbolized really by the anatomy itself. And again, societies used to kind of do this, at least Western societies, right? Which for our standards really, is very different these days, I would say, in terms of normal people. Maybe celebrities, it's a little bit different. All right. Notice the importance of Garland back at that weird police station on Mission Street, right? What he did was he arranged to split Rick from Phil, right, in putting them together. Remember, there was the other option, but no, he wound up with Phil for a reason. And it was to clearly show Rick who he is and the change that is necessary. Phil says that he shouldn't have let Luba get his goat. All right? And this is taking us closer and closer to what's called the parable of the sheep and the goat, which is biblical and being utilized, I feel, in this text to a high degree. So we'll cover this in a moment. But he says it right here, almost a foreshadow of the whole thing, right, to bring us into it. You shouldn't let Luba get your goat, right? Meaning get under your skin. But goat is very specific here. We have this animal, right? But literal is where true symbolism lies, right? If we actually, get your goat means get under your skin. It's an idiom. It's a figure of speech. But no, we need to take this literal. Get your goat. And we're going to look at what a goat is right now. All right. So this is when we start talking about, here we go. Whoa, like flew way down here. Where did I go? Okay, good. We're making decent coverage here. Let's keep going. Okay, here we go. So this is where we, the big allusion to the parable of the sheep and the goats from the Bible comes into play. And what the whole idea behind it is the sheep are on, it really boils down to giving us this. The sheep are on the right side of God, right? The right-hand side, the favorable side. And why? Because the sheep are the types of individuals, right? They represent people. They represent a type of person. And the sheep is, and we know that sheep get the best symbolism in the Bible, right? They get kind of prime symbolism. And the reason is because there's this idea that sheep are aware of the suffering of others, right? So the sheep are aware of when, other people around them suffering. It takes us back to that anticipation guide question that we started with, being aware that people are going through hard times. And this could be true, just to bring it to that targeted kind of context of the Holocaust. This could be very true in Germany itself. People who are aware of the suffering of Jewish populations, and it's causing them to at least get out of their seats to some extent, to those who kind of ignore it and avoid it and don't give the help when the help is needed. It speaks to two types of people throughout time. Therefore, you get them referenced as the sheep and the goat in the Bibles. Now, who are the goats? It's bad to be the goat. Bah. Oh, that's a sheep. Meh. Okay, there we go. I got it right. Mixed them up there. It's bad to be the goat. You don't want to be the goat. The goat is, it's not necessarily that you're the type of person, right, that when somebody's in a state of need, you just don't help. It's that, make sure you write it down, you didn't notice in the first place. You were totally oblivious to their suffering, right? You had no sense of it whatsoever. And that's the goat, right? So to get your goat is to start making you reflect on the type of person that you are, right? And what's represented by the sheep and the goat. Okay. Now I can start to reveal some things. Rachel. Now, go look up the meaning of the name Rachel in Hebrew and tell me what you find. I'll tell you what you find. You find female sheep. So our characters are starting to take on the exact allusions here that are referenced biblically here. And think about that. What is a sheep? Somebody who offers help knowing that somebody needs it. They're in a state of need. What is she doing? Trying to help Rick. Worried about Rick. Right? And we'll see if this develops throughout the course of the text. Right? Who is Rick? Rick is the goat. There's probably other goats, right, that we could speak to, but Rick is the one who maybe He's changing though, that's huge. But maybe before this, prior, he didn't understand the suffering of the androids. He tuned out from it. He found ways of avoiding it, distracting himself from it. But we know he's changing. I am definitely struck by how, right at the halfway point, once we get to mission, Rick's changes, and even before that a little bit, Rick's, even, when he's listening to Luba Luft at the Opera House, he starts changing very early on in the story. That perspective takes a long time, and maybe it doesn't even shift, but it takes some time, right? All right, moving forward. Rick admits that Luba, the planet, could have used her. He understands the value in who she was and what she was sharing, which caters to the symbolic meaning of her name, love, and also ascension, right, through love, and the impact this trait would have on the world. Who is the bounty hunter? What role does he play? Right? That's a question we can ask ourselves at this point. He's eliminating things that, upon reflecting afterward, he realizes were good things in the world, right? Brought positivity to the world. So who is he? Phil points out that he saved Rick back on mission. He means that Garland would have killed him, but maybe saved is we have a different understanding of saved. And I think what that means is it's true. He did save him in the sense that he showed him a twisted version of who he could have been through their interactions, their time together, and what he did to Luba, and it forces Rick to reconsider his role and feelings. Phil suggests he will suffocate himself if he is an android, or if he finds out, he says, well, how are you going to kill yourself? He's like, well, I'm just going to hold my breath. Rick is a bit astonished by that and says it can't be done. I think it's this idea of suffocation. We see it thematically through the text. A planet suffocating, perhaps an android suffocating, but this idea of just a stopped breath altogether, right? Maybe which is a ceased existence, it could be. Rick cannot use the Benelli test on Phil. He can't interpret the readings. Maybe because you can't interpret genuine good people, right? That's a harder thing to do. They start to discuss art movements, which is interesting after this, references to art throughout the text. The scream is not representational, sharing real things from life, right? That's what Phil doesn't like about it. It doesn't look real. It's not talking about real life. Ironically, it does. It's about human psychology. So Phil is incorrect, it seems. He has to ask 6 to 7 questions needed. Right, 6 might be this idea of a flawed man and beast, right? Now, going back to the parable of the sheep and the goat, it is kind of referenced sometimes with like 666, but what that really ties back to is the ultimate version of the goat, which would be Judas, for not realizing the need and suffering of Christ when he had a chance, and he kind of breaks from that, right? So he is kind of the ultimate example, I believe, of the goat, right? And he also kind of is this idea of the beast too, self-preservation, right? Not connected through human empathy. Phil passes the test. Strangely enough, he is 100% human. Garland does not split them up. Rick wants to feel human by unidentifying with violent, callous traits of Phil. It turns out they are both real men, and I think that's a daunting prospect for Rick. He was hoping to see that whatever Phil was and what he disapproved of was exactly what he wasn't. But here they are both human, which means that potential is all the same. It's all very real. Yet, in contrast to Phil Resch, a difference had manifested. Question of empathy toward an artificial construct. So we do see that Rick is slowly changing. The role of Rick is, don't forget what the name means, protector, guardian does come in. If empathy is allowed for in androids, or in the historical example of Jews, then the human race, or in the other context, the Nazi race, would be destroyed. So meaning, the minute you start to feel sadness for them, and you understand the pain and suffering, and you start to see that from their point of view, you might change your actions and your treatment of them, right? It might cause you to change, and so therefore you have to make sure that doesn't happen, right? Rick tests his own empathic response to what happened to Luba, and he gets some readings here. He gets, let's see here, John 3:3. I kind of looked these up with biblical passages. And there's John 33, which means born again. Born again does not make sense in that Rick has changed his stance. Okay, that's not good. That's not a good one then. 46 is what I'm telling you on this. I think we'll just skip these. Yeah, I don't need these. Okay, so Rick tests his own empathic response to what happened to Luba. One reading he gets off this is 406, and I got 46, and so if I look up some of the biblical passages that this connects to, one of them is 40.6. Isaiah speaks to mortality and goodliness. You know, mortality is an important theme when you think about his changing feelings toward the androids, because he's seeing them as life, right? It kind of speaks that whole idea of life and death, and he's starting to change his feelings about that. All right, very good. He rides down with two creatures, one human, the other android, and my feelings were the reverse of those intended, is what he says, as they, of course, after killing Luba, descend. Rick distinguishes between two things, sex and love. Phil says that they are one and the same, right? Like a love of country and a love of country music, right? Phil says he should sleep with it says Rick should sleep with an android first, and that would make it easier to retire the android after, because you would not have the empathy you think you might have, right? Somehow sleeping with them kind of nullifies whatever feelings you might have been having. So he says that's needed. And it's kind of strange because it brings in this idea of sex, and that the man must have sex with this woman android. Then it makes it easier to verify the lack of empathy he might have for her. It's kind of a strange thing. All right, very good. And he says this with a, of course, diction, hardened smile, right? Again, strange that everything has to tie to sex and the male genitalia, right? But you saw a lot of that in that chapter. All right, moving right along, taking advantage of the time I have. Chapter 13. Like an arc of pure fire, quite a extraordinary way to start the chapter. It speaks to a brilliance of light that is rather absent, it seems, in this dark and kind of dismal world, right, that we have, this dystopia. So I think that's kind of a positive start. John as Phoenix, a conscience reborn, where Rick perhaps is trying to get to that level, right, still struggling, especially with Phil by his side. John's car is personified, which feels appropriate, right, that electric and mechanical is in his mind the same as natural and organic, right? So through the description of the vehicles, these ideas start to be demonstrated. Pris says John's advances are wasted on her. She slumps into a depression, drops even further into uselessness, listless and barren. It reminds me of Iran back in Rick's home, right? And yet here's John and Pris trying their hand at some kind of, you know, male-female relationship, right? Some kind of arrangement here in an apartment and seeing if it can work. You see a lot of that. The buying of the cheese and the dinners he prepares, right? Like a man and a wife. And I think it's that topic of 1950s traditional family, right? The roles that men and women play within these families. Moving forward, the word barren is used, highly appropriate for an android, because we know that they cannot procreate. And that's one of the feelings, I think, one of the general concepts that tears them down, that depresses them. Right? I think that's that lack of life. Okay, very good. She says she has friends. Let's not forget that to have friends and make that claim, that means that you have empathy to some degree. I don't think you can be included in a social circle, that's the whole idea, without some form of empathy. Some references to John Donne, old English poet. Can't say I've read a lot of his work. No man is one. That speaks to these empathic ties. That's one of his big topics and themes. No man is one. And that's largely what religion provides, right? Is the connection, that kind of a connection. All right. Within the same scene, Pris is eating a peach. She's trying a peach. Peach represents immortality. That does make sense when we talk about the topic of religious aspiration, to feel connected to something that is infinite, to feel connected to something that is everlasting. Remember, that's one of the big ideas about religion for some folks, is the idea of some infinite kind of existence, right, in some way, shape, or form, and feeling connected to something. And that's what she's looking for here, right, by biting into this peach. It's not immortality in the sense of lengthening our own earthly existence forever. We know they have limited lifespans. They'd like to have something longer, right, more appropriate to make them like human beings. But it does, I think, speak to the whole idea of religious aspirations and feeling connected to something that is greater than yourself, right? No man is greater, is ever alone. No man is one. All right, here's some names. Roy translates to king. Interesting name for an escaped Andy. Baty translates to rich in land. This is a kind of theme delivered through names, usually, always through names. But it is this idea of how, having land contained. You go back to the Penfield mood organ, right? Penfield means to put up a pen, to enclose. So it speaks to land, the division of land, but we also will get some names here, and I think this is one of them, Baty, rich in land. So an abundance of land. I think ultimately it speaks to freedom, being free, not being closed in. So I'll just kind of mention that one, just to let you know what Baty could reference here. Irmgard is complete and universal, right? Irmgard's name means complete and universal. Pris keeps her cover, but does seem to speak the truth about the horrors of Mars. She says the Andes are very lonely, and here we're talking about this topic of loneliness. We also recognize, coincidentally, John is lonely as well, being a special here in San Francisco, on Earth, right? They start to talk about pre-colonial fiction, which is kind of interesting to think about. The type of literature that existed before colonization in the pursuit of Mars, right? And the fantasizing and the idealizing of how great that could be versus how awful it turned out, right? And this is true. Anybody who keeps up with colonization on Mars, that's going to be some tough work, man, for anybody who does that in the next 50 to 100 years, whatever it's going to be. That's going to be some nitty-gritty, people dying, getting disease. It's going to be an ugly thing, but it's going to be necessary, perhaps, if they want to pursue it. And that's what it's kind of turned out to be, and that's why, in the context of this book, having androids that aren't even human that can do these things without issue is so attractive, and they turn it into slave labor, and we end up falling back upon old practices, what the human race is capable of, right? What we can do to each other. All right, very good. Moving forward. All right, for example, right, Venus, which is, of course, a representation of love with kind of independent, strong women, right, like Irmgard. It's part of kind of this fantasy. We read it to avoid the fact of the terrible mess it has become, especially we consider the slave labor that's been used to colonize, right? The success of the colony comes through the success of the using slaves there. Irmgard and Roy arrive at the end of this chapter. Looks like a married couple from 1950s, right? The way they kind of show up, because I think that topic is explored here. However, somewhat threatening as well, right? Roy's looking a little anxious. Chapter 14, I'll keep it going. All right, chapter 14 opens with an immediate interest in the peach yet again, this time from Irmgard. Again, immortality, religion, the possibility of ascension and immortality, kind of everlasting consciousness, right, all this. That's what they're looking for. That's what they want. And that's what the peach represents moving forward. Something we notice about this trio, they are actively being hunted. Think of Jews in the Holocaust, and we sense their fear, right? Is it real fear, right? If you're kind of thinking about that question, it's androids, which mean the emotions aren't there. The psychological reflections aren't real. They might be simulated, they're not real. That's a question you can ask yourself. Is this real fear that they are feeling here as they are being hunted down? John questions it. Do we trust his judgment, right? Roy says, "Key reist," right before expressing what could be empathy, as he thinks about keeping his friends together, right? And it's a misspelling of Christ, but still the exclamation sometimes can just draw those character traits kind of in. Garland tries to save Rick at the mission. Very successful. I think Garland is never realized until now how essential his character is in saving Rick. Bounty hunting is to work fast as hell, and meaning it can have these kind of hellish qualities, right, when we think about it in a biblical terms. John imagines a merciless bounty hunter, somebody like Rick, killing androids, taking them off his list one by one, an endless stream, just like Phil, and just like him, just like Rick, of course. Pris discriminates against John for being a special, so this is where I think we see the six emerge a little bit. The truth, the validation that these are in fact sixes, meaning imperfect humans, because she expresses a discriminatory attitude toward John for being special needs, essentially, right? For being affected by radiation to the point where it's affected his health, his intelligence, his cognitive ability, etc. So she's very nasty to him. We take note of those traits, but we also recognize this crisscross here. Notice that John, what are the negatives of John? He lacks intelligence. His body is breaking down. He can't have children. He's lost that ability, right, because of the radiation. The way he's treated in his society to some degree, etc., right? But especially in terms of abilities, he is lacking. Whereas, contrasting with that, the androids are perfect at everything. So what does John have that the androids don't want? Well, John is accepted into society. He's accepted into Mercer. He's accepted into the human religious experience, and they are not. So it's interesting here, we really do notice that each respective kind of party here, John and then these androids that he's hanging with, they want what the other has, right? Roy is given leader-like status here, and that makes sense because the name is King. And I think in some ways, the details here are a bit Christ-like. The leader who can draw a group of people in desperate terms around him to lead them into some kind of safe domain, right? So I think he fits that description. Now, fully, I'm not sure. We'll see. Pris lies and says that they are escaped schizophrenics with flattened effect. This takes us back to the Penfield mood organ, flattened effect, canceling out emotions, or just not having responses to real stimuli in life. Like something awful happens and you're kind of numb to it. Right? So this reminds us of Iran, right? And in fact some humans, right? And we can relate to that in our own terms as well. Ray is given machine-like details. John kind of sees the robot underneath a little bit, like the android qualities are visible on the outside. A couple little fun facts about Roy, just in terms of what things he talks about. He praises insects. That's interesting because we will have a big moment with a spider later on in a future chapter. He sets up an alarm system and uses this as an opportunity to insult John, saying it won't detect him because he's not even like a real human. So it's kind of in a way. So you see them insulting. I think there's the six a little bit, right? I think there is definitely sympathetic qualities for these Nexus Sixes. How couldn't there be? They were slaves, right? And the way they've been treated, but at the same time we see that they're capable too of harm and insult and degradation and things like that. Okay, moving forward. Penfield, I said this earlier, never really thought about it up until this, preparing all this, is you look it up, it means to pen animals. That's what it means. Penfield, to pen animals. To pen things in. We get a lot of penning in of animals in this story, right? Keeping them in crates and cages on the top of roofs and stuff, right? But I think it's also to like enclose people, to keep you contained over here, to cancel, to kind of restrict you here. I think we can think of it in that way. Think about how slaves felt in terms of being penned in, right? Just like animals. So we go back to that historic example. Ray claims they couldn't help killing their human controllers. How could they? Says John doesn't care what they've done, but only cares about emotional acceptance. And I think that's one of the questions we can ask, if we haven't already, is, you know, do we really criticize them for killing human masters if indeed they were being owned as slaves, right? And what people would do for freedom, but of course they do have that blood on their hands, hence they are sixes, one of the most notable qualities of being sixes. Here we go, chapter 15. We see the way that they are treating John with no empathy toward him. Sixes, 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 right? To not recognize the person in a state of suffering or need. Important that Pris stands up for him. She's been spending a little bit more time with him. I should say, not from that, but John has a new authority that he gets from the vid call. Remember when he had to call the owner, and he was kind of forced to do that? I think it executes a resurrection of sorts. The real cat comes back as electric, but John does not know, and also caters to the situation, right? Including with the androids that he is living with now. He knows they're androids, and yet it doesn't affect the way he feels about them and his decision to let them stay and provide some kind of refuge for them, right? Rick immediately goes to, oh, I love this. This is so cool. Makes me want to go to the car, you know, to the car dealership. Because it's all the same. Rick immediately goes to Animal Row. And this is basically in this cool story where we know that animals are treasured beyond belief, and there's different tiers and levels, and where do you want to get in? You want to get at an ostrich, or you want to go all the way up to a, you know, whatever it's going to be, right? It's called Animal Row, and so he goes to find a new animal. He's got money, lots of irony in the sense that he's eliminated android life to collect money, money, capitalism, to then go and buy an animal that's going to somehow connect him to God and humanity, right? The irony, you can't even fake how crazy it is, right? So moving forward from that, I think this is starting to get into some of these topics, like showcasing a consumerist society. That animals, our empathy is commodified and given a price tag, and you can finance it, and you can get it on a payment plan, right? And you can get real, or you can get electric, but we all know you want real. Rick is kind of turned on by it, which is taking us back to sex, arousal, which is another topic constantly explored, right, in this book, from male to female, and that dominance too that we were talking about. Feels very similar to a car dealership. He's looking at a family of rabbits, right, which is a pair of rabbits. When he says a pair, it means a family. But the salesman upsells him to a goat. And wouldn't that make sense, right? Taking us right to the parable of the sheep and the goat. The goat being the type of person who does not wake up to other people's suffering, doesn't acknowledge it, doesn't notice it. But a different story. Goats are defensive, but can be tamed and saved from above, right? And they share some weird story about how somebody could steal the goat and it could be saved from above. That's exactly what Rick is in need of. He's in need of saving from some kind of aspect of life above this kind of death and violence that he operates with, right? That's the way I looked into that little story that they share, right? Goats are not bothered by an irradiated world. They can feed on anything, just like John can feed off this job. Rick. Just like Rick can remain a bounty hunter and do the most dismal, form-destroying work possible, and yet still find some kind of an existence. Takes us back to the idea of the ostrich. Was an animal that was referenced earlier because of the idea that it can live through anything. Even the most scarce conditions, where there's barely any life there, the ostrich finds ways to get through. And that's the planet. Even in a dead planet, Rick finds ways to exist. He can stomach bounty hunting. Okay, let's see here. It's a female goat, right? Rick finds the goat beautiful, and I think that brings us back to a state of arousal, right? The beginnings of what could be a sexual experience or intimacy even, right? He finds it beautiful, a symbolic attraction. It's got an attractive price even, right? So a lot of attraction here. He's attracted to it. And if you look at it with the parable of the sheep and the goat, he's attracted to the idea of what the goat represents. Essentially somebody who is numb to other people's existence, doesn't see it happening. He wants that. The goat has a long life expectancy. That contrasts with the androids. It's a deal, Rick says. What kind of deal is Rick making here? That would be a question I could ask. Right? It does seem a bit sinister here, all right, and a bit unfortunate as well, when you start to think about what the goat represents on a thematic level at least. This is his second real animal. The first was a real sheep. There you go. He had a sheep at one point. Now we got the goat. And I think it has a lot to do with the continued actions of just eliminating androids and still doing it. And that's why we have a goat in our possession here. Despite the fact that he's changing his mind, his body is almost moving forward with this ongoing agenda of eliminating androids, right? It's quite magnificent. Could speak to his life before bounty hunting, having the sheep, right? A different Rick. He is appalled and shaking due to this transaction. I think because of what it represents and how it's a reflection on who he is. It's a way of not feeling like Phil, but he is on his way. And we have a long descent all the way to the roof, to the apartment. A descent would make sense after buying the goat. Together they moved near to God. This is Iran after he shows it to her. This is ironic considering that he has retired 3 Andes, but they're moving closer to God. And it is a lowercase God, right? Just to point that out. He needed an animal. He needs empathy. Rick intended on mating his animal, but what is kind of strange considering the themes, which is kind of strange considering the themes in this novel: mating, copulence, right? Can we mix real black goat? Iran asked, can we mix the real black goat with a fake electric sheep? And this is perfect for us. Can we mix a real human being with a fake sheep, right? With an android, right? Can we mix a goat with a sheep, and we know which one is respectively real and electric? Are these two things going to come together? No spoilers, but we will see this kind of happen in terms of characters, right? All right, Bill says he hopes the goat has kids, which could be a pun on the word to get us to think about the idea of real children and family dynamics, right? Mom, dad, kids, especially in a world so concerned with procreation, right? Quickly, I'll say it. I know I've read a little bit about this, like when you consider the role of women that was encouraged in Nazi Germany, right? Because that is kind of one of the targeted contexts of this book, I believe. Really just to stay at home, domestic, and have babies. So a large emphasis just on, having babies and procreation, but definitely not having lives outside of those homes. Moving forward. A lot of the world was like that at the time too, but still, those were the perspectives on women at that time in that country. Iran says her depression is cured because she can now admit the sheep is fake, because now they have a real goat. It allows her to get sexual with Rick. It turns her on. It's kind of awkward as readers as we see them get turned on by these strange things, but I think being aware of these topics and themes like we have been, you see the connections that are occurring here, right? Note the previous attraction that Rick had to the goat. It's almost like it's being continued now. Iran is attracted to him. He stabs the elevator button. That's not a really nice word to see here. Sex is offering sacrifices along with bounty killing, and Rick wants to postpone this, and he wants to stay on the roof with the goat. Iran wants to go downstairs and get intimate immediately after having this goat. I think that's a negative. We're descending. We're doing, some kind of sexual act and basking in some kind of indulgence there for a particular reason. He wants to stay up there and hang out with, well, what do they name the goat? Euphemia. And if you reference this, it's Saint Euphemia. And she is the saint that essentially opposes sacrifices, the offering of sacrifices, which were common in civilizations prior to Christianity. And this is the big one, and it's built into the goat's name, but the saint also stood against all combat, warfare, gladiator fights. She stood against all of that kind of stuff, against combat. Despises all combat, right? And a refusal to offer sacrifices. And I think the refusal to offer sacrifices is a big one, because I think you can see the androids getting hunted down one by one so that he can get money to buy animals and keep this kind of charade going. You can see the sacrificial nature of the androids, right? And Euphemia, by name here, when we look up the saint, is a refusal of all this. I think this is a judgment for Rick. right? Speaks to his character. It speaks to what he's doing. Aran encourages and convinces him to share his positive feelings about the goat with Mercer and all people. She thinks it would be a good opportunity. It's a very odd comment from Aran. We might even reach a potential suicide, she says, which is a horrible way to explain an extreme state of happiness. We might even have a suicide from it. It feels self-destructive. An overdose on greed, right? An overdose on euphoria, perhaps. The empathy box is like an exchange of euphoria, but you also get the misery as well. You have to be in touch with all human emotion. I think that's important. Because you have to be on the lookout for those who are suffering as well and be hearing those voices and responding to those voices. You can't be negligent. That's the goat, right? Be the sheep. Understand. Rick tells Aran he met a predatory one who liked to destroy them. And he's talking about Phil, the form destroyer, right? Rick admits he was once like Phil. So this is kind of a big confession for him, or a big realization. Aran scans the contract and realizes that Rick is forever indebted. He took on a whole lot of debt to take on this goat, and due to an interest in God, due to the goat, in need of salvation. A whole lot of debt to get this. It leads to the consideration of changing positions, but now he needs the bounty money. He was changing. We talked a moment ago about the changing consideration of androids and their potential for real, authentic life and religious aspirations and whatever it's going to be, a whole lot of things. But now because of buying this goat, the symbolic value of it, and now he needs to go out and hunt more androids to pay off this debt, he's stuck now, right? So whatever kind of progress we were making, he really seems to counter it here with this purchase. And I think that's why he shivers when he buys it, right? It's a major regression for him. 52, it's mentioned to be 52.50 less a month. Jeremiah 50:52, this is a biblical passage. God and the Israelites revenge on Babylon. So something's going to happen to this goat, right? And I don't want to say anything too early on because we still have a couple chapters here, and these are kind of chronological. But there will be a retaliation. There will be a strong blow from the other side of the matter here, right? You know, up to this point, it has been the humans that have been dealing blows upon the androids. Well, notice the only real blow that's been dealt upon the humans that we can talk about, aside from self-annihilation of their own race, is the mutiny, when they had to kill to get their freedom, right? So we know they're capable of some kind of violence. We know they're capable of some kind of revenge, and I think that's why we have this 52:50. Again, Jeremiah 50:52. The God and the Israelites' revenge on Babylon, which is kind of one of these antagonistic civilizations at the time of the Israelites, right? So remember, when you're reading from a biblical point of view, the Israelites are essentially the good guys, right? So if they're taking revenge on Babylon, that's going to be an antagonistic kind of society. This is a precursor to, I won't say it, but something, right? We'll cover it in class, I'm sure. By coming downstairs, Rick can't avoid the department call to keep retiring Andes. The calls are coming. Now that he needs to keep killing, the calls keep coming. And